Hello, everyone. We're taking our time because we have such a huge audience and we wanted everyone to get a minute to come aboard. But I'm Amanda Olkey. I'm the Director of Adult Education at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. And I can't thank you enough for being here for our Spies and Spy Masters Happy Hour, the Valentine edition. We are going to have a really interesting evening looking at love and lie detection. And we don't mean that you can't trust whoever is in your love life, but we just want to give you some skills because we're all about education here at the Spy Museum. One of my favorite humans is convening the panel tonight, and that's Mark Zaid. He is a fantastic supporter of the Spy Museum. He has spoken in person for us many times. And now we've gone virtual. He is a national security lawyer. He is a comic book collector and just a generally great guy. So we love working with Mark. And he's going to be introducing this incredible panel that you see around me when we get down to business. But I want to let you know that there's a reason that there were two drinks recommended, and that's because we're going to go hard tonight on Valentine's Day. We are going to go extra long because everyone has such cool stuff to tell you. So we'll probably be going till about 7. So you're going to need both those drinks. And we have our very favorite mixologist bartender, Hillary from Lost and Found. Hi, Hillary. Lost and Found's in the Shaw neighborhood, and they are open, but she is beaming in to show us these glorious drinks. I'm so excited, Hillary.
Hi, thank you for having me, and happy Valentine's Day to everybody. We're going to start tonight with the Berry Fine cocktail. So a little bit sweet, a little bit spicy. We're going to start with some 1.5 ounces of gin, and we're using Green Hat today. So a local gin made in DC. And then we're going to go with just a little bit of Chambord, which is a raspberry liqueur. It's really delicious. We're going to do a little squeeze of lemon juice here. And then we're going to shake this part up. And pour into our flute glass here. And then we're going to top it with some bubbly, which is perfect for Valentine's Day, of course. And then we're going to garnish with a little raspberry. And there you go. You have one over there, Amanda?
I've got some bubbles to cheer with you. Lovely. And then I want to see this other, let's have a sip. And then I want to see this glorious chocolatey thing.
Okay, so then we have a little chocolate covered cherry cocktail with a bourbon drink. So we're going to start with bourbon. You can choose any that you have in the house, but we're doing Redemption bourbon here.
I like the name for Valentine's Day.
Definitely. We're going to use a cherry liqueur. So we're using Cherasum, which is a local liqueur by Don Ciccio and Figli, which is also a DC distillery. And then we're going to just add our chocolate, which in this case is chocolate bitters right here. And Bittermint Bitters, also made in DC. And we're going to shake this up. And pour into our coupe glass here. And so a delicious bourbon drink. And we're going to garnish it with a little Luxardo cherry here.
My fave.
So here, cheers, a little bit for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hillary. And Lost and Found is open safely. And we happen to know that those drinks are on the menu because Hannah from our team had them the other night, and I'm very jealous. So thank you again, Hillary. We really appreciate you so much. And happy Valentine's Day to you.
Cheers.
And there's only one thing standing between me and turning it over to Mark, and that is to thank our incredible sponsor this evening, and that is the alumni of the University of Rochester. Thank you so much. That has enabled us to let so many people join us for free this evening. Thank you, University of Rochester alum. And thank you, Mark Zaid. I'm going to be quiet now and let you take it away.
All right, thanks, Amanda. I love the Spy Museum ever since it opened its doors in the old location around Ford's Theater in DC and now in L'Enfant Plaza. And I hopefully that everyone can come and visit when things get somewhat back to normal. I have my Spy Museum martini glass here with James Bond, obviously, in the background of my office. Let me first very quickly introduce my three other fellow panelists, and then we'll get started. After I go, Tom Moriello will go, and Tom is a retired Defense Department Chief of Polygraph, spent 30 years in the Federal Service. I've known Tom for many, many years. He is a fellow Nats fan, Washington Nationals with me, which I will say, as we connect to University of Rochester, which is my alma mater, our farm team, our AAA farm team is now in Rochester, New York. So that is just fantastic. Tom is also a senior lecturer in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Maryland here locally, and a forensic consultant for, as you can see on his screen, Forensic IQ. After Tom goes, then Hassan Haq will go. Hassan is an associate professor of computer science at my alma mater, the University of Rochester, doing some amazing work in AI. And I think you'll be really interested to see this. And then finally, but not least, Jennifer Vendemier, who's an associate professor of psychiatry at the University of South Carolina. She is our token sort of out of town, really out of town person here, near the Defense Department's former Department of Polygraph Institute, DODPI, which is now, I always forget, Credibility Assessment, DACA, NACA, something of that sort, but the entity within the US government that trains polygraphers. And Jennifer is also the former head of the Center for Advanced Technologies for Deception Detection. So I am going to try my hand at technology and make sure that I can share this screen. Any of you who signed up have seen this image, Wonder Woman from 1952, issue number 53 of DC Comics. A very close link to what we're talking about here today. She is obviously undergoing a polygraph examination. And there is something very specific and special about this visualization, because the creator of Wonder Woman, a man named Charles Moulton Marston, under the pseudonym or pen name Charles Moulton, was also one of the key founders and grandfathers or father of polygraphy. Polygraphy basically has only been around for a century or so. And while Marston was one of several peers in his time period who was developing the technology, he was one of the key people. And we're going to talk a little bit about him. And here, of course, we see Wonder Woman, a little bit more modern image with her magic lasso. And what is it about that lasso that is so tied to everything that we are talking about here tonight?
What the hell is this thing?
The lasso of Hestia compels you to reveal the truth.
But it's really hot.
What is your mission?
Whoever you are in more danger than you think.
What is your mission?
I am a spy! I'm a spy. I'm a spy.
Of course, how can he not be a spy at a Spy Museum event? Well, Marston was basically the P.T. Barnum of polygraphy. If you wanted to see a marketer, this was the guy. He was not only a PhD, but he was also a lawyer. And he took his show on the road. This is a photo from the late 1920s. He's in Hollywood And he was working for a lot of the Hollywood studios to test emotions of those watching the newfound technology of film. And he took it elsewhere. Here is an ad. Don't try and read all the minor text here, but we see right here. Here's Marston himself selling Gillette razor blades because a polygraph could determine whether or not men were actually getting a close shave or not. And it also dealt with things of what we're going to talk about today, love and lies and deception. So here we had, is a kiss from her husband more pleasing than a kiss from a stranger? The polygraph will tell, or will it? Now let's meet Mr. Marston.
Dr. Marston and emotions. It's 18th of July, and Dr. William Marston demonstrates complicated device whereby he claims he can determine and compute comparative emotions of blondes, brunettes, and redheads. Says Marston,
"This is the sphygmomanometer, an instrument which measures the subject's blood pressure in the arm. This is the kymograph drum, which records the breathing. The breathing is taken with the pneumograph around the subject's chest. We are now going to test the girl's reactions to gambling."
Taking in inventive doctor's tests, our blonde, brunette, and redhead try their hand and luck and show their emotions at roulette. The wheel of fortune spins, and all wrapped up in Dr. Marston's paraphernalia, girls have their various reactions recorded. Here's kymograph with indicators showing one girl's reaction to game of chance. Needle is moved by subject's breathing. Here we see how redhead reacts to gambling, and as she wins, Marston's emotion finder indicates that redheads show most emotion when gambling. Now girls are taking reaction tests in matters pertaining to love. Watching love scene, all girls show some signs of emotional response to a romantic scene, but not all show a similar reaction. Kymograph shows it's the brunette who wants to be loved. Now here's test to show which of three is most susceptible to shock or fright. Taking a look at the kymograph, as we go through that again, Dr. Marston and science show blondes are easiest to scare.
You can't make this stuff up. That video is almost 90 years old. And Marston's use and creation of Wonder Woman extended throughout pop culture. Dick Tracy using a polygraph. Superman, Clark Kent being polygraphed. Batman in a court proceeding being polygraphed. And then Mr. District Attorney, a very popular radio show from the late 40s, 1950s that became a comic book. And here again with a law enforcement legal relationship to polygraph. It wasn't just pop culture that was dealing with these issues. Polygraph and lie detection, whichever technique, plays an important role in our legal society over the last century. Here's a picture from 1926 of a man named James Fry with Marston to his right with the glasses on. Now, for my legal friends out in the audience, Fry may be meaningful to you because there's a Supreme Court case, Fry versus United States, from 1923 that for decades stood for the proposition of when scientific evidence could be used in a court proceeding. And in this particular case, Fry, who actually was prosecuted and convicted for murder here in Washington, D.C., Marston did a test of essentially an early lie detector. It was, I can't even pronounce the names, it was essentially just detecting his systolic reaction with his blood pressure as to whether or not he had made a false confession to the murder of this doctor. And they tried to introduce that for evidence in the court proceeding, which was denied. And for 70 years until a case called Daubert, which many of the lawyers will know, and even still to this day, some states use Fry as the test. And it all comes from Dr. Marston. 1926 as well. This is the first film use of a polygraph. It was a silent film. But we have seen enormous amounts of pop culture references to polygraphs. right? Just some of the films that I'm sure all of us have seen, but also television shows, but movies like Fire in the Sky, Meet the Parents, of course, Black Klansman, My Spy, Equilibrium, Mission Impossible, Rogue Nation, Sneakers, which was one of my favorites back 30 years ago with Robert Redford, which used not just a polygraph, but a voice detection system to see if they could apply the polygraph to a faceless voice that they were hearing over the phone. Television, Howard Stern. Anyone who's a fan knows what lie detection has been used in Howard Stern. Vanity Fair, if you Google, the last couple of years, they've been interviewing all sorts of stars, Mark Wahlberg, Kevin Hart, Seth Rogen, Charlize Theron, giving them polygraphs with the most ridiculous of questions. The Politician, if you've been binge watching Netflix like I have and everybody else, Real Housewives, CSI, Law and Order, House, and of course, The Bachelorette. This is a game in my collection from 1960 for lie detectors. But there's also not machines. How about human lie detectors? Daredevil, Matt Murdock, who extra senses because he's blind, he could hear the officer's heartbeat and he knows that he's telling the truth. Is that real? We might find out today. But we're talking about love here today in advance of Valentine's Day on Sunday. And Archie, poor Archie, always caught in between Betty and Veronica. And I don't know how this story ended up, but this is the heart of what we are going to discuss as we talk about different technologies. No matter what, polygraph and lie detection has been an issue throughout our different relationships in trying to prove one way or the other, are we being deceptive or honest? And of course, the ultimate question that we all men want to avoid no matter what. Could these devices and other technologies and methods be used to uphinge the male thought process or the female thought process? Or even cats? Apparently nothing will take care of cats. They will always fool the polygraph. With that introduction, I am going to turn this over to my good friend, Tom Moriello. Tom, take it from here.
Thank you. I don't know where to start, Mark. First of all, I want you to understand something. Yes, I've gone to Washington Nationals games with you because you've invited me for free, and that was nice. But I'm from Massachusetts, and I'm a fan of the Boston Red Sox. Let's get that straight, because I got people from Massachusetts listening to this, and I'm sure they were a little concerned there for a second.
Hey, look, I'm a New Yorker, always will be a New Yorker, so the New York Mets have a place in my heart as well.
Okay, well, that's your problem. Okay, anyways.
1986, that's what I'll say, Tom, 1986.
Okay. First of all, let me just make sure there's a point that has to be made right away. The polygraph is not a lie detector. We keep calling it a lie detector. We've been calling it for hundreds of years, but it doesn't detect lies. It never detects lies. And I hope, as long as I'm alive and in my children and my grandchildren alive, that they don't come up with a technique, although we may hear about something different in a little while, that detects lies. The polygraph simply detects, well, Marston said emotions. It detects physiological responses to psychological stimuli. That psychological stimuli being responses to questions. And the problem with the use of the polygraph in reality, and that's what I'm going to be talking about, how the government uses it, is that the general public doesn't understand what it is and what it isn't. And when they go to take a polygraph, they have all these misconceptions that really cause a problem. Part of the reason for those misconceptions is because the polygraph community in general has not done a good job of getting out there and educating the general public. Now, I started early as a special agent with the government in polygraph. I conducted about a little over 1,000 polygraph tests. Now, that may sound like a lot, but it's certainly not a lot compared to some of the numbers that other polygraph examiners have done. At the end of my career, my last 3 years, I was chief of polygraph at my agency. So I've had a lot of experience in the process, how it works, et cetera. There are 16 federal polygraph programs in the United States government. Many states, but not all states, also use the polygraph. The polygraph is most effective when it is testing people in criminal matters. When it's a single issue, like, did you kill Mary Jones or didn't you kill Mary Jones? It's pretty straightforward. Now, the government mainly uses it for event-free screening, to screen people when they're going through a background investigation to determine that they meet the standards of suitability and loyalty to the United States government and reliability and mental stability. So there's a bunch of questions that they're asking about their background. They're not suspects to crimes. So the difficulty is that they're asking a number of different issues all in one test. And that is a difficulty when using the polygraph. People, in reference to misconceptions, I have a short clip that I'm going to ask Mark to show now that is very typical when you're seeing CSI or even cartoons. Listen, watch this.
Now we're going to run a few tests. This is a simple lie detector. I'll ask you a few yes or no questions and you just answer truthfully. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay, a couple of problems with this. First of all, every time the polygraph is portrayed on television, there's this big metal attachment around their head. There has never been a metal attachment around anybody's head when they take a polygraph, but it looks good. Hollywood likes that, and it gives them the audience a feeling of mystery. Also, there's people behind there while the test is going on. No, there's nobody there except the examiner and the subject, because they need to make sure that they're focused. And she referred to it as a lie detector. And again, if there's one thing my students understand when they go to take a test in my class, is that they never refer to the polygraph as a lie detector. So the misconceptions that people come with cause this problem. Marston, who did some positive things for the polygraph, showboating it didn't really help the polygraph community. It really didn't, because now you get all these crazy TV shows that are asking people whether they did something or didn't do something, and that is a real problem. The kinds of questions that we ask during a suitability test are difficult to ask. For example, listen to this question. Have you ever committed a serious crime? Now, when you think about that, what's a serious crime? What's serious for you may not be serious for someone else. Based on the fact that this program has to do with love and Valentine's, I can remember two cases where a person truly was reacting to the question, have you ever committed a serious crime? The test clearly showed that they were reacting significantly to no other question but, have you ever committed a serious crime? After I described it as something serious enough that if the police would have found out about it, they would have been arrested or indicted or fined. That's how we define it. This one individual, he was he was an engineer, he was a contractor applying for a clearance to work for the government. And finally, after asking the same question several times and him reacting to it, not lying, but reacting to the question, I shut the instrument off. I moved around and sat in front of him and said, the test clearly shows there's something that we haven't discussed. He finally broke down to tell me that what he hadn't told me, that he was associating with serious crimes, is that although he had been married for 30 plus years, in the first year that he was married, he had a one-night stand love affair with his wife's best friend. And that's been bothering him for 30 plus years. And now today, for the first time, he's asked with a polygraph attachment around him that question. And the only thing that he thought about was this indiscretion back when he was married less than a year. The problem at that point was that he had lied to me so many times, well, in his mind, he lied. Actually, he didn't lie to my question, because that's not a crime. It was a crime in his mind. So he was reacting to it. It was the response to that question was a threat to him. So I told him to come back the next day. I was in California testing him, and I said, if you come back and if what you told me is the truth, then you'll have no problem tomorrow. The next day I said, how you doing? Fine. I said, you ready to take this test? Yes. I said, you're going to be okay with this? Yes, I know. I said, and I looked at him. I said, you feel pretty confident? Yes. Why? That night he went home the night before and told his wife what he did 30 years prior, because he wanted this clearance so bad he wasn't going to let anything interrupt it. Now, that's crazy. I told him, I said, listen, the government is not concerned about that specifically, as long as you couldn't be blackmailed for it. So, when you describe these questions, you can only answer yes or no. And I'm going to ask Mark to show the next video, because, people think that you can give, a narrative response to this thing, and it's not. You can only say yes or no. In reality, what kind of a question, a personal question, can you possibly answer with just a yes or a no? Here's an example of what we see in Hollywood that causes the public to be confused. No.
Now we're going.
The next one.
I noticed you were looking at that when I came in.
Yeah.
It's an antique polygraph machine.
Is that what that is? Because I've seen these before, but I never saw one actually up close.
You know what? Why don't you try that on?
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, come on. We'll have some fun. I'll show you how it works.
Yeah, I shouldn't.
Well, why should you be afraid? You have nothing to hide.
No, I know.
I know you know, so there shouldn't be any problem.
No, there's no problem.
So, try it on.
Okay.
I'll help you. Don't worry. You'll enjoy this. All right.
Looks complicated. Now, these aren't 100% accurate, right? They're...
Well, you'd be surprised how accurate they are.
Is the polygraph 100% accurate? Nobody really knows. I don't care what kind of research has been done. How do you really know whether a person has been truthful or not truthful? That's a difficult thing. When this clip goes on, he responds with every question with a narrative, and you only can say yes or no. That's why each question is reviewed very carefully with you, so you understand, and you try to get the subject to understand, because again, this is not a lie detector. We want the subject to be able to answer yes or no confidently, that they're not hiding anything of concern that is a potential threat to them. If they are being polygraphed because they're a suspect of a crime, and they committed the crime, they don't want to get caught and lose their freedom. If they are being polygraphed because they are trying to get a job or a clearance with the government, they don't want to get, if they're going to intentionally lie, they don't want to get caught because they won't get the clearance, they won't get the job, etc. So it's that fear of detection. The sympathetic nervous system is the sub autonomic nervous system that the polygraph is actually recording. When you perceive a threat, physical or psychological, then the polygraph reads that. Now, the question is for the examiner, is that reaction because the person is lying or being deceptive, or are they reacting for another reason? And sometimes you never really know. We've had people that didn't pass the test, and then we have them come back. We ask the same questions, and then all of a sudden they're not reacting to it anymore. They didn't give us any new information, but they're not reacting anymore. So what happened the first time? Why were they reacting and now they're not reacting? So false positives become a problem because false positives can affect a person's career or life, and not if they don't get a clearance, etc. One thing that I want to mention that I didn't hear Mark say in reference to Marston in the Fry case. The Fry case establishes standards for the use of forensic science in the ability to use the results of forensic science in a court of law. The 1923 decision by the Supreme Court was that the polygraph was not at a level of acceptance in reliability. Therefore, the polygraph that they did on Fry could not be admissible in court. Here we are, 2021, and guess what? in most,
I noticed you.
in 49 of the 50 states, it's still not allowed in a court unless there's some excuse me, stipulation. And here's a map that shows you. You see that little green down there in the southwest, Midwest there? That is the state of New Mexico. For some strange reason, New Mexico now allows the results of a polygraph to be testified in a court of law. I have no idea what planet they're from to make that decision. But there is, the blue states are allowing it if the defense, the prosecution, and the judge stipulate and agree to it beforehand. Now, but I want to make sure that everybody understands what generally is not accepted is not what they say. If they confess during the polygraph to something during the polygraph examination, they can use that because they're advised of their constitutional rights before any test. What generally can't be used is the opinion of the examiner on whether that a person, excuse me, was successful or not successful. So when a polygraph examiner says deception indicated when they don't get any admission or confession, I question that as being valid and reliable because they don't know whether it's deception, lying, or whether they're reacting for another reason. I gave you one example. I'm going to give you one more, and then I'm going to ask Mark to put the last one in. I had a person who was reacting to the crime question, and what was his problem? He was having premarital sex with his fiance, and for religious beliefs, he felt he was committing a crime. I had to explain to him that the government was only concerned about crimes of the state, not crimes of a higher authority, and that as long as he wasn't forcing himself upon his fiancée, that it was okay. He couldn't believe that. He eventually passes the test. So if the polygraph can't be used generally in a court of law, the people always ask, then why is the government using it? Because most of the derogatory information that is obtained during the investigative process is obtained from polygraph interviews, obtained from the people themselves, admitting to certain things that they probably wouldn't have if the instrument wasn't in the room. A lot of the admissions are given even before they turn the instrument on. Here's one example, and then I'm done, and I hope I haven't gone too much over my time. This is a poster of somebody who committed espionage and was convicted, Walter Myers. And he makes a statement, and they made a poster that they put out throughout the intelligence community. I suppose I'm a walking example of the advantages of the polygraph because it would have weeded me out almost certainly. And in my case, I wouldn't want to put myself at risk. So he made the statement that because he was a member of the State Department, and the State Department generally doesn't use the polygraph like the rest of the intelligence community, that he was involved in espionage, giving information up to Cuba. So with that, I'm going to shut up, and I look forward to answering questions later on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you, Tom. I mean, it's all fascinating stuff. I have spent more than 2 decades dealing with polygraph cases, representing folks who have sued the US government. 20 years ago, I sued the FBI, DEA, and Secret Service over its pre-employment polygraph program. And I've also represented polygraphers. And it's fascinating how this is used at different agencies across the US government. And I'll say, the US government has never been able to acknowledge that any spy has been caught solely because of the polygraph. But I can tell you lots of innocent people have had their careers derailed or even ruined, unfortunately, as a result. But let's go and talk about something else. Let's talk about some artificial intelligence and AI. Hassan, I turn it to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to take a 180-degree from what Tom has been talking about and talk about whether it's possible to recognize when somebody's lying by watching their observation, just by talking to them. And I'm going to start by playing a video. Pay close attention because there will be a poll right after. Mark?
One of us is not telling the truth.
Can you tell which one of us
is trying to deceive you? fluent in 3 languages.
I grew up in Shanghai.
I grew up with 5 different pets.
I have never traveled outside of the United States.
I have never broken a bone.
My favorite author is Ray Bradbury. So,
did you guess which
one of us?
Which one of us is not being truthful?
Among the 6 individuals, who do you think is the liar? Let's wait for 10 to 20 seconds for everybody to respond. There are 6 individuals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you have further insights, feel free to type them on the chat as well to justify your response. Maybe we can stop the poll. Yep. Do you have the results yet? All right. I think there's a lot more votes for person 5. And the second one is person 1. You guys are pretty good. Actually, person 5 is the one who was liar. So great job at it. That's nice. Good to see that. Next slide, please. Now, why is detecting when somebody's lying so difficult? Using 43 muscles on the face, we can create up to 10,000 unique facial expressions. And if we add what we say and how we say, our gestures, our physiological data, and our individual differences, the complexity becomes astronomical. So how do you solve this problem? Next slide, please. So let me probe this problem by giving you one more quiz. So here I'll play a video of an online experiment where the participants play an interrogation game. One of the participants plays the role of an interrogator, and the other one plays the role of a witness. Witness has the option to tell the truth about an image that she has just seen. So we're going to watch this video, and then you'll have to guess whether the witness is lying or telling the truth. Mark, can you play the video?
Now I'm going to ask you guys about your image. All right, what was your image?
Oh, my image was about my eyebrows.
Okay, can you run the poll now? So you have to guess whether she was lying or telling the truth. Let's wait for 20 seconds for majority of us to respond. All right, maybe we can stop the poll. Oh, wow, it's pretty even-handed. That tells you how difficult the problem is. 51% said, majority of them said she was lying, and 49 said she was truthful. Well, and one reason is she couldn't keep a straight face as soon as she was being probed. And one may argue that that may be a sign of deceit. Next slide, please.
Now I'm going to ask you guys about your image.
Can you stop?
All right, what was your image?
Mark, can you stop that?
Oh, my.
All right, so before I play the video, the experiment started with the interrogator asking some baseline questions to the witness, just like the polygraph test. So let me play the video of the witness answering some of those baseline questions. Mark, go ahead.
First, what kind of computer system are you using?
I don't know. Maybe Windows.
Okay. All right, please tell me whether or not I'm wearing glasses.
You're not.
Okay. What color clothing did you wear yesterday?
Maybe black? I'm not sure.
Okay. What is 12 plus 19?
Oh, that's 31.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So one thing became very clear, that the witness smiling is not random. It's in her personality, and it has to be taken into account. So the answer to your question is she wasn't lying. It's just in her personality, even though majority of the people here thought she was lying. Next slide, please.
First.
So the idea of baselining is not a new concept. it's been studying in the interrogation in the past. So let's hear from a famous FBI hostage negotiator, Chris Voss, about this topic.
What I'm really looking for is the way a polygraph works is it's not trying to pick up your tells, it's trying to establish your baseline. What do you look like when you're telling the truth? You're going to lie 15 ways. You're going to tell the truth one way. So my small talk is really designed to get your baseline on what you look like when you're telling the truth. What'd you have for breakfast today? You know, what was your commute like in today? You know, how many kids have you got? The stuff that the polygrapher asks you a bunch of baseline questions. And then anytime you deviate from that, if I say, look, what's really important to you? And you're like,
Does that mean breaking eye contact?
Breaking eye contact, looking in a different direction, chances are you've probably got at least 4 different ways that you signal discomfort. Lying is just a means of discomfort.
Next slide, please. So we took inspiration from Chris Voss, and in our experiment, we have set up baseline questioning. So I'm going to play one more video with a bunch of witnesses answering to one simple question. What clothes did you wear yesterday? And you will see a variety of responses. Let's play the video and enjoy it.
Blue. Pink. Yeah, pink.
Oh gosh. Blue. I wore a blue sweatshirt yesterday.
Yesterday, I wore a blue shirt and black pants.
What did I wear yesterday? Black. I had like black skinnies on and then like a gray t-shirt.
I don't remember.
So it's very clear there's a significant individual differences, the way we retrieve information from the past. And it's very overwhelming for a human interrogator to take that into account, make those connections, and in the end, make an objective decision. So over the years, we have developed techniques using artificial intelligence that can understand and make sense of some of those human nonverbal nuances and can provide feedback to the interrogator in order for them to be more effective. So it's not about AI detecting when somebody's lying or telling the truth, but more like assisting the interrogator see patterns that are invisible to the human eye. So the interrogator from 50% could be as effective as 70 to 80% accurate in detecting when somebody's lying or telling the truth. Next slide, please. Can you stop? So for example, in this video, you will see there are 2 small clips of a participant. In one clip, the participant is making stuff up. And in the other one, the participant is remembering from memory. So we're going to play one video at a time. And could you tell which one is which? Mark, go ahead.
It's probably really like airy and like fluffy looking, and you can't really see anything out the windows because it's
Okay, number 2.
there were like our basement was refinished, so there was like couches and a rug down there, and then there was the main floor. So when you first walked in, the living room was on your right, and then there was like the kitchen and the dining room and a bathroom, and then upstairs were like there were 3 bedrooms, so it was like my room and my brother's room and then my parents' room.
So I don't know about you, I even forgot what the right answer is here. It's tricky. When you ask people, we polled a lot of folks and the accuracy was on 50-50. Mark, can you press the next button and maybe we'll see the answer?
It's probably really like
one is
airy
making
and
stuff
like,
up, 2 is making stuff, and 2 is remembering from memory. But when AI was applied, it was able to understand many of the nuances, how she was making the eye contact, the rolling of the eye, and it was able to find a pattern and got as close to 67% accuracy in detecting when somebody was remembering versus when somebody was just making stuff up. It's pretty scary. Next slide, please. Now, I'm sure all of you are thinking that if AI could really become better than human in detecting deception, what would it do for our privacy? So we have some ideas. So we believe that AI could be and should be applied to statements made in public or court to measure its truthfulness. Next slide. However, it is not acceptable to use AI to expose thoughts of a human without their consent, a phenomenon that we termed as mental trespass. For example, here, there are fancy devices that could be used to get information about you without your consent, and that should be banned. Next slide, and that's my final slide. So this is the framework that you recommend in the future to protect citizens' privacy and to also prevent the abuse of the technology, because I think the technology may get here in the next 5 to 10 years down the road, where anybody can take a cell phone or an app and ask you a question and determine whether you're telling the truth or lying. So there should be a general use ban for AI that exposes thoughts without consent, provided that the accuracy of AI is higher than humans. So that's my 10 minutes, and I look forward to answering your questions down the road.
Fantastic. Thanks, Hassan. And hopefully I have stopped sharing screen. Somebody can nod and say, right, you're not seeing the rest of my screen. Good. Excellent. Some of what Hassan's talking about, it can be incredibly dangerous. And things like the voice stress analyzer has been cited over the years. And especially there was a book from the late 70s about the Kennedy assassination, John F. Kennedy, and whether or not Lee Harvey Oswald had made truthful statements when he said, I'm just a patsy, because of this voice stress analyzer, of which the science is pretty much less than nil. And we will now turn to Jennifer for your presentation.
All right. I am going to take this in a completely different direction than my co-presenters. I'm going to talk about advanced technologies for deception detection. A lot of the current technologies use this signal noise approach. There's some sort of stimulus, you're measured and a baseline is created, and then there's some sort of combination of maybe skin conductance, respiration line length, blood volume pulse, microexpressions, eye movement, pupillometry, and then some sort of pattern classifier is engaged, and we determine whether or not you're telling a truth or telling a lie. This very loose format is pretty much how all polygraph exams and most advanced technologies are used right now. And this same approach can be used for brain measures, for the advanced technologies. We can take a measure of brain regions and or brain potentials, reduce the data and come up with some sort of pattern classifier and get truthful, unknown, or deceptive responses the same way, up to 94% in the lab. That is not the real world. The idea behind the signal noise approach in brain measures is that perhaps somewhere in the brain there is an evil waveform, and this is the one we can find. It's the one that shows you're hiding information. In a single issue test, it's the one that says you have something guilty that you're trying to conceal, or there is the naughty bit of the brain. And in the naughty bit of the brain, if we could interrupt the naughty bit, or we could excise the naughty bit, we could stop detection. There's something called transcranial magnetic stimulation, which was actually proposed to me as a way to interrupt brain activity and cause people to be unable to lie. So if this could happen, this magic, which would be wonderful, we would find that brainwave, we would remove it, and ba-boom, honesty for all. Hearts and flowers. Unfortunately, deception's probably one of the most complicated constructs in psychological history. Of the theories We're talking about cognitive theories, awareness of deception, the intent to deceive, the need to inhibit truthful information, congruence with memory, the type of memory you're trying to retrieve, workload, how much effort does it take you to deceive? For some people, it's fairly easy. They have a lot of practice. For some people, it takes a lot of effort. Emotion, guilt. You know, as Tom was saying, some people feel guilty about things that other people simply don't feel guilty about. How salient it is, what the fear of the consequences are. These are all parts of this construct. It's so complicated that we're not even able to fully lie until about age 25. We develop our first abilities around age 3. We get much better at it around age 7. We go through another developmental peak around age 13 and then 18. But it's not really until we hit age 25 that we develop those regions of our cortex that make us able to deceive. Just to give you an idea, you do not have to memorize this. I'm not testing. These are some of the things that go into creating a good theory of deception. Higher order psychological constructs, which need to be broken into lower order psychological constructs. And then we have to assume that the neural correlates we're measuring map to those. And then we have to make inferential measures. If we were Sherlock Holmes, well, let's just face it, Sherlock Holmes would have nothing on us. But let me break it down a little simpler. There are some cultural things going on, the norms of behavior for a culture, what are acceptable lies, what is acceptable as a truth in your culture, what is not acceptable as a truth, the language, how difficult your language is, the psychology, the characteristics of an individual. These are all just basic ideas of what goes into deception. Recording in the brain. Now, I teach a 2-year course on this, but I'm going to break it down to a single slide. ERPs measure electrical activity in the brain, while fMRIs measure blood metabolism in the brain. Much like when you use a muscle, blood flows to that muscle. When you use an area of your brain, blood flows to that area of your brain, and we can measure it. ERPs are very time sensitive, so we get a good time lock. fMRIs are very regionally specific, so we get a good sense of space in the brain. Where is the activity coming from? Put them together, you get a good map of what's going on in space and time when somebody is deceptive. Now, if we were asking a question, the question would start here. And the answer would be way at the end, past 750 milliseconds. And the P3A occurs when we switch from either telling a truth or telling a lie, or vice versa. So it happens around 260 to 270 milliseconds, and it's located in the anterior of the brain. The N400 is when the statement that you're about to answer does not match what's residing in your memory. And then P3B has to do with making the decision to lie or not to lie. And so there's a lot more that is involved in making the decision to lie. And so it tends to be suppressed or lower in amplitude, or another way of phrasing it is more diffuse when you're being deceptive. Aspects of deception in the MRI. This is what's called an exploded brain. This is the back of the brain. This is the front of the brain. The first thing that happens is when somebody asks you a question, we use part of the parietal lobe to orient to the question. The more salient it is, the faster we orient to that question. The more important it is to our goals, the faster we orient. So it starts moving to the anterior of the brain. And after that, we need to allocate some resources, and you need to allocate more resources to be deceptive than truthful. And so it takes a good 23 to 43 more milliseconds to allocate resources to be deceptive. And what do I mean by that? Now, these are all pictures of the anterior of the brain. And so if there were eyeballs, they'd be here somewhere out in front. Actually, they'd be around here somewhere, sorry. And here we're looking at language evaluation, kind of working memory types of things. Here we're looking at emotional evaluation. Here, this is inhibition. Being truthful is prepotent. That means that we tend to generate a truthful answer even when we don't want to. So we have to inhibit that response before we tell the lie. And then finally, there's this executive in area 10. This is the most advanced part of our brain, and this is what trips most people up. It's the part of the brain that's involved in not just telling one lie, but keeping a whole sequence of lies together and making them make sense. And so multiple decision forks here. Now, there are different types of lies, and it determines the neural network or the memory network associated with the deception. And I'm going to talk about some of these, and this is based on 2 decades of research that I've done. And I just want you guys, as I go through each of these, to ask yourselves, have I told this type of lie or not? One of the things that activates this network is, am I going to get in trouble or escape trouble with this lie? Or am I going to get a benefit for the lie? The other thing that affects the network is the type of personality of the person who is telling the lie. And so each of these lies has a set of personality characteristics that are associated with the type of people who are likely to tell these lies. So ask yourselves, are you the kind of person who's told a lie to avoid something? You've wanted to attempt to minimize penalties associated with a specific incident of inappropriate behavior. You stole something, you said something you shouldn't, you stole the cookies. I think that's the first one we all tell. Did you take those cookies? No, I have no idea where those cookies came from. And it tends to be correlated with people who aren't very sincere. They don't have a sense of integrity, and they score low on responsibility. Interpersonal ploys and social enhancements. The underlying motivation here is to improve our social standing by impressing or gaining sympathy from others. High impression management, higher depression, lower sincerity. I'm gonna confess, I've done this myself a couple of times. I have to admit it. Concealment. This is a hypocritical act in which people misrepresent a quality within themselves. I'm pious. I'm honorable. I'm brave. I don't tell lies. And this is low sincerity, low integrity, high depression. This is very interesting because these high depression ones, they're linked to specific neural networks, and they tend to be pretty strong. The higher your level of depression is, this neural network activates more strongly. You're more likely to tell these lies. And then gainful misleading. This is a lie employed to extract a specific benefit from another person. These represent a deception during a specific action, such as a fraud. And so here, this is an interesting one. This is one that you often see actually during with spies. They don't believe the world is fair. They don't believe the world has been fair to them. And so, so they simply don't believe in the fairness of the world, and high impression management. So these are just some of the classes of lies. And then one that we have seen a great deal with the birth of social networks, verbal malice. When I first started my research decades ago, I started doing open-ended questionnaires, asking people what type of lies they told. And among my student population, I was floored. I was shocked to see that they were very likely to tell verbal malice lies. It's to cause harm to another person while simultaneously benefiting the person causing the harm. The single worst one was a girl had broken up with her boyfriend, and then she told him she was pregnant when she was not, in order to get the money for an abortion. And then she went and she told her friends that her boyfriend, even though he had given her the money, that her boyfriend had not given her the money. And so she had to pay for it herself. And yet she had never been pregnant. I believe this is technically what we call cray-cray, but that's just me. Here we have low sincerity, low integrity, and a belief that the world isn't fair. And the only way that you're going to make it fair is to hurt somebody else. And so these activate different types of neural networks based on emotions. So that's my presentation, and I do want to talk just a moment, say one brief thing about the future of lie detection. If we keep doing what we're doing right now, if we keep developing technologies and algorithms that do nothing to help us understand what our brains do when we lie, what the underlying psychological constructs are that create a lie, what makes a lie for me in this situation, what my understanding of the deception is versus somebody else's understanding of deception, we're not going to move forward. We're not going to advance detection of deception in 10 years. We're not going to do it in 100 years, and we're not going to do it in 1,000 years. We're going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. We need to understand why we lie. And so that is my whole presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. I don't have a cat filter, but I got a cat who keeps trying to poke into where I am, saying, see, I told you I wasn't lying. See, I told you I wasn't lying, which we all know is probably not the case. We can all see the questions. So I want to have a tiny bit of a conversation amongst us before we go specifically to a question. But if any of you, as our speakers, want to address a particular question that you see in the chat room, do so. And I encourage each of you to write out your answers. And there was one particular thing I want to have a brief chat on. I got cat fur now all over me on this text. There were a couple of questions I can combine. And one question was about Aldrich Ames, the convicted CIA spy back in 1994, who had been spying for the Soviets and the Russians for many years. And he took, as a CIA employee, a number of polygraph examinations, both to get into the agency and for periodic re-examinations. And he passed. That's at least what has been stated over the years. And it was an interesting conversation with him because when he was arrested, he talked about, how did he get past this polygraph? Because actually he didn't pass. He registered physiological responses to certain questions. And in advance of it, he said he talked to his KGB handler and asked the KGB, do you have anything that I can take, any type of pills, countermeasure techniques that I can use against this device? And reportedly, he said the KGB handler just said, just relax. Now, how did he get through the polygraph? Well, polygraphs are really, as we've all heard tonight, it's about interrogation and techniques. And I will never, ever encourage anyone to use a countermeasure, which I'll talk about in one sec. Because if you are caught or suspected of using a countermeasure, you are dead. That is the same as being accused of lying. And, truth is in the eye of the beholder. How do you disprove or prove a negative? You can't. So if they accuse you of it, that's a problem. But Ames registered some issues physiologically, and he just talked his way through it with the examiner. And there was also a personal bias, both in the Hansen case of the FBI and in the CIA case of, oh, no one within our agency would ever betray us. So if we're given a reasonable answer to explain, that's enough. So the questioning then stopped. But one thing, and Tom, I'll throw this out to you to start with first, and then Jennifer or Isan, if you want to weigh in at all, please do. The notion of some examiners are always telling, they might ask someone, have you done any research about the polygraph before you came in here? And that is viewed as a negative. It's viewed as a negative in my perception because it may lead you to understand that pop culture is not accurate with respect to the accuracy of the polygraph. And I don't train people how to beat the polygraph. I train and prep people how to respond to interrogation questions, just like I do on a witness, for a witness on the witness stand or in any type of interview. Can you talk a little bit about maybe countermeasures and this notion of research of the examination?
I just answered one of the questions in reference to the use of countermeasures and the fact that when you, at the beginning of your polygraph during the pre-test interview, they're going to ask you, what do you know about the polygraph? And as Mark said, if you start telling them, well, I went to antipolygraph.org because that's what popped up. The bottom line is there's more stuff, anti-polygraph stuff on the internet than there is polygraph stuff, because the polygraph community has not done a good job of putting out good information about the polygraph. In my opinion, the polygraph community needs to recognize that it's 2021, and that when somebody has a question or they're about to experience something they never experienced before, the first thing they do is pick up their phone and they Google it. And that's normal. And that's different than intentionally trying to be deceptive or use countermeasures. But as you said, Mark, they right away start questioning it. You know, all of a sudden, all the major polygraph examiners, especially the federal ones, are all trained in countermeasures. So now, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and that's the problem. I tell my students, you know, who are all potentially going to be polygraphed because they're in law enforcement or some aspect of criminal justice, etc. I said, listen, if you haven't looked it up, you're better off not doing it. We're going to be studying the polygraph in this class. When the person asks you, what do you know about the polygraph? Tell them Tom Moriello was your professor, and he was the chief of the Department of Defense polygraph, and he explained exactly what it is and what it isn't, and then shut up.
I say the same thing to those who go in. If they ask you, have you done any research? I said, tell them you talked to Mark Zaid, your lawyer. Don't tell them what I told you, but you know they'll understand that they're just being prepped for any particular exam and how to answer or not answer questions.
You know, you don't beat the polygraph, you beat the examiner.
Exactly.
Plain and simple. Okay, the
Can I weigh in
polygraph.
briefly?
Okay, go ahead.
So you can go online, but also psychology textbooks are terrible. They're rife with errors about the polygraph. There has been an article written about it. And so one place you can't go for good information about the polygraph is where you would expect to, psychological textbooks. In any psychology for a course textbook is filled with misconceptions and misrepresentations about the polygraph.
You know, I wonder, especially in how I put everything forward with this kind of history of the pop culture aspect of it. I throw out to you, you know, where would we actually be if, with respect to lie detection in the United States or elsewhere, if pop culture wasn't continually pushing this envelope, giving this false impression as to what technology can actually do?
Yeah, we certainly have a question from the Americans about being trained to beat the poly, which we see that over and over again. Can it be done?
Anyone want to take it?
I'll take it. If you look at my background over, let me see, right there. There's a what we call a butt pad on the seat, and a number of years ago, up to a number of years ago, the polygraph community was convinced that they couldn't be beaten and that countermeasures wouldn't work. until they started realizing that that wasn't true. And they created an additional attachment that goes on the polygraph, and it simply measures movement. If in fact a person is using a countermeasure where they're moving some aspect of their body at a time when they're asking a certain kind of question that will confuse an untrained examiner, then you know, they could beat not the polygraph, but beat the examiner. So there is additional tools connected to the polygraph that helps recognize the use of countermeasures during a test. But again, it's up to the examiner to properly interpret that.
I think the issue of the use of polygraph in the court of public opinion kind of falls loosely under this, because when somebody goes in for a polygraph that's going to come out in the press, you know, your examiner can create an exam that can be passed. It can happen. I've had the opportunity to observe several of the examinations of high profile cases, and talk with them, with the examiners, and some I believe were good polygraph exams, and some I do not. And so when something comes out in the court of public opinion, that's not held to any standard, really.
Is there, sorry.
Yeah, Hassan, did you want to add something?
Well, I'm new to this area of deception. Only I've been, compared to our panelists here, only been doing this for the last 5 years. And the reason I got into this space, because most people I spoke to said polygraph doesn't work. It's very unreliable. That's one of the reasons we started looking into some non-invasive ways of inferring information. We're still far away from recognizing when somebody's lying or telling the truth, but our idea is to be able to, can you help the examiner make an appropriate decision? Right now it's 50%, can you make it 70?
Strangely enough, the single issue tests are very reliable. What they aren't is valid. They're not measures of deception.
And mostly what I deal with are these screening exams, not the specific incident tests, which are much more used in law enforcement and obviously some espionage or counter-espionage investigations. But most of what the federal government uses polygraphs for are screening exams. They don't know what the answers are. They're fishing, and they're trying to get someone to make an adverse admission. I mean, if you're a polygrapher, the way you demonstrate your worth is not to pass everyone, it's to gain an admission, an adverse admission. And it's interesting that in the private sector, this was so abused for decades, post-Marston, that in 1988, the Congress passed the Polygraph Employment Protection Act, which prohibits most private sector entities. The Spy Museum would not be able to polygraph its employees or applicants, but yet the federal government still does. And so, go ahead, Tom.
You mean that wasn't okay when they did that to me?
No, I will represent you, Amanda, for free, of course.
Mark, you're starting to sound like a defense attorney right now, okay? All right, the government is not trying to get anybody to do anything. They're simply trying to determine whether a person meets a standard. They're not, you know, so they're not looking for reactions. Now I lost the second point I wanted to make.
I think it's people have never lost a chance at employment exclusively because of a deception indicated on a polygraph. That's not, there has to be more than one marker.
And that,
well, let me tell you, there are certain government agencies, and I won't mention who they are, who are specifically sending letters back to applicants saying, we've terminated your employment possibility because of deception indicated in your polygraph. Well, they can't make that statement. If we believe anything we said in the last almost hour and a half, is that a polygraph is not a lie detector. So when a person doesn't admit to anything, but gives reactions to a question, that doesn't mean they're necessarily being deceptive. Yet reports are being written and people's careers are being lost or ruined or not even begun. I've had students say, I can't go anywhere because I took a polygraph and they said I was being deceptive about drug use. And I personally, and that's crazy.
Yeah, in fact, that was the basis of the litigation I brought 20 years ago, which frankly I should bring up again. And the FBI actually changed its letters when it denies people employment or withdraws their conditional offer of acceptance. They used to cite to the polygraph specifically, and as a result of the lawsuit, because I threw it back in their face, they changed the language and just said that you fell outside of the whatever requirements for hiring.
All right, I'm going to change the subject because we have a number of questions asking about gender differences. Are there gender differences in lying? Sorry, Mark.
All right. Hassan, why don't you take that first? What did you see with all your AI studies? Is there a difference between gender, religion, culture that you could see?
Well, our data set is large. It's the largest data set on deception, especially virtual environment, face-to-face, but still small enough where I don't feel comfortable making a sweeping generalized statement. In the data set that we have seen female being better and recognizing when somebody is lying to them. But again, that's in the context of the data set, which is mostly American within an age group of 20 to 45. But among culture, how that translates to culture, I think it's an active area of research.
How about your research, Jennifer?
What we have found, and it's the same caveats, women are more likely to tell lies about interpersonal information, whereupon males in our studies have been more likely to tell lies about small infractions. And so that's been a big difference between those two populations. Another thing to bring up is that there are disorders that make it impossible for people to detect deceptions in others, such as autism. There are disorders such as Parkinson's, which make it difficult for people to tell lies. And so there are disease conditions that impact the ability to tell lies above and beyond gender.
Somebody with Parkinson's, it's almost impossible to polygraph in the first place because of their movements.
Well, I'm talking, there's actually what's called a pre-Parkinsonian personality. And so before they even develop the symptoms of Parkinson's, they begin to develop this rigid, almost truthful personality where they can't generate deceptions.
I don't have that.
One thing I just want to quickly add, that we also looked at, often in deception, you only want to look at the witness. But in our case, we also looked at the expression of the interrogator. And we found that when the interrogators are being lied to, they leak out information that's very indicative. So it's not just one person. You need to recognize both people in tandem. And then that reveals a lot more information about whether the person is lying or telling the truth.
Now, Hassan, as part of my training, I was always taught to mirror the person who I'm interacting with during an interview. And so has that been part of your research?
I mean, yeah, we know the literature about mirroring, right? So mirroring things for building rapport, that's always there. But we thought what we saw in our data set when an interrogator is being lied to, they showed different kind of smile when they were being told the truth. And that was very significant. It could be an artifact in our data set, but that was significant.
You know, it's interesting when you showed the woman who was smiling when she was talking, whether she was, I remember the very first rape victim that I interviewed who had gone through a violent rape. When I was interviewing her, she was smiling and almost laughing when she was answering my questions. And that was the way she was dealing with the terror that she had just experienced, you know, and you could tell that. But someone else might have looked at that and said, "Oh, this person's lying. She's just, you know, this can't be true. Why would she be smiling and laughing?" You know, after interviewing a number of rape victims, each one was quite different in their reaction and how they answered questions and in their emotions and everything else.
You know, another thing where I saw people having problems were long distance runners, those who were very good with yoga and meditation because they could control their breathing. They had low heart rates, and that would throw off the physiological response in the exam in a way that's not negative or atypical for that subset, but is atypical for the normal subset of the population, so that when the polygraphers would see it, they would interpret it, or they might interpret it as some sort of either countermeasure or falling underneath the baseline, even though that person just could get their heart rate to 40 versus most of us who are, 55 to 70 beats per minute.
You know, I take a pragmatic approach to this whole thing with the polygraph. I like the polygraph just the way it is. I don't want it to be any more than it really is. It's an investigative tool. It should not be the end all of any investigation. For example, the government can use it, should use it, but when they start allowing the squiggly lines to decide whether somebody should continue their processing, they're doing a background investigation. The polygraph is just one aspect of the investigation. If they do an extensive background investigation and they don't come up with derogatory information, and just because the polygraph wasn't to their satisfaction, that's crazy. Criminally, it's a psychological instrument. It psychologically gets people to confess to major crimes that they wouldn't have otherwise. And
before we disappear, I know there are a bunch of people who had questions about pathological liars, and can a polygraph or anything else pick up, and they wanted to know, Jennifer, if pathological liars have any of the same reactions that regular people do. So they also kept talking about one particular pathological liar, but I'm not going to mention who they were talking about.
Well,
thank you.
In typical psychological fashion, I'm going to say it depends. And one of the things it depends on is how much prefrontal cortical damage is occurring. And let's say somebody can't inhibit rage, for example. Likely, they're not going to be able to inhibit misrepresentative information. They're not going to be able to filter inappropriate information. And so that person may not react, but a pathological liar, somebody who's a psychopath, they used to think, because of a misrepresented article back in the 80s, that psychopaths did not show up on polygraph exams. They didn't have reactions. That's not accurate, because there's a great deal of cognitive workload going into telling lies if you're doing it right.
If the examiner is doing it right.
Yeah. If the examiner is doing it right, there's cognitive workload when somebody's telling a lie. And that will show up on a polygraph.
Look, the bottom line.
Because it's not necessarily guilt exclusively that causes the changes in those squiggly lines. It's also cognitive workload.
I've said this, and I think you have to acknowledge it. The polygraph has a utility. It has a utility because people make adverse admissions. And the cases I have seen over the years, as is anyone who has worked with it, is that information was learned that would not have otherwise been learned if not for the person making the admission. Now, the problem is that the way it should be? That's a good question. We're not going to answer that tonight. But I come down to, and Jennifer, you mentioned this in particular, and Tom as well, the notion that if all you have is a physiological response, which cannot necessarily be interpreted as deception, it's just a significant physiological response for whatever reason, that by itself cannot be the basis for the adverse determination that's being made. And the Defense Department actually has a rule that they can't use it for that purpose. But I see agencies do that time and time again. Again, why I brought this lawsuit 2 decades ago, that still needs to be addressed again. But as long as pop culture and The Bachelorette and Vanity Fair and all of these television shows and movies keep putting lie detection whether it's polygraphs, AI, mood rings, whatever, it's brain waves, whatever it might be, as long as they continue to talk about it, people are going to think it actually works. And that's why the federal government's going to continue to use it. So I don't know if that's going to help anyone for Valentine's Day on this Sunday, whether or not, if you forget to buy flowers for your significant other, what excuse you could give. I would just tell you, buy them on Saturday instead of waiting till the last minute. Amanda?
I know it's so funny. We've gotten questions from people who are like, how is this Valentine's Day? And also thank you for this Valentine's Day. And I appreciate you bringing it back on the Valentine's theme, Mark. And I really thank everyone who joined us tonight to have a little pre-Valentine's learning experience. And I hope you're not going to, use any information you picked up in a way that we wouldn't approve of on Valentine's Day. But I just think it was such a fascinating panel, and I really appreciate them all being here. I can't thank the alumni of the University of Rochester enough for enabling us to host so many people. And I have to apologize because we had so many people, it was impossible to get to all the questions, but I know some of the panelists were answering in chat, and we'll see if we can pick anything up and share questions with you all later. I just want to do a little plug. We do lots of great online programs for all audiences. The next one that I'll be hosting is next Thursday, the 20th anniversary of a terrible, despicable liar. Robert Hansen was arrested 20 years ago next Thursday, and we're going to look at that case with an FBI agent who's now retired, Deborah Smith, who worked the investigation. So if you loved tonight, if you're looking forward to that one, please consider donating to our Mission Resilience campaign at the Spy Museum. We really appreciate it. We love being here for you. We love being part of the community and also meeting new friends. Any final words, panelists and Mark?
Certainly, I enjoyed the time. I hope the 1,000+ people enjoyed it also.
Yeah,
we can have a.
Yes, again, Spy Museum glassware for martinis and James Bond. And please come visit the Spy Museum when it's open, but whenever you're comfortable, given the pandemic, come visit the Spy Museum. Absolutely. One of the best museums I have ever been to.
And I hope you never need Mark as your lawyer, but he's excellent.
Hey, you can just Google me and come. I want to thank the panelists. You guys have been fantastic. Hassan and I have been talking about this, doing it for years. Tom, we're going to go to Nationals games when the season comes back and we can go. And Jennifer, you got to come up to DC and join us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a great night and happy Valentine's Day, and stay well.